My name is Jeremiah Griffith. I'm a technical writer for Ultrasource in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm a CAD administrator. I've been a designer, a drafter, and just about everything in between. I've been using SolidWorks for about 10 years now, 10 to 12 years. Been drafting for about 15. So I've been a CAD administrator since 2004. And I am an active user group member and the president and user group leader of the Kansas City SolidWorks user group. Before we get started on the presentation, how many of you people here are user group members? Fantastic. The rest of you, why aren't you?
We don't have one in Norway.
Oh, well, that's a good excuse. I highly encourage you to get involved with the user groups. They're a fantastic resource for you. And if you don't know where one is, come find any of us with these green badges. Well, I don't have mine on. On the bottom of our badges, there's a green tag. It says SWUGGIN. Come find one of us. We'll put you in touch with your user group. So I said before we started this, this is a very basic introductory class to the Property Tab Builder. We will go over what the Property Tab Builder is, what it does, why you should use it, and some integration into Access and Excel that'll make your life a little bit easier. If you already do those things, I don't want to waste your time, so just know that now. The history of the Property Tab Builder. Property Tab Builder was released in SolidWorks 2009, and it replaced several macros that were out there. Before 2009, there were a bunch of people who realized we needed something like this, and so they custom coded some macros. SolidWorks saw those macros, and through the feedback of the users, decided, hey, that'd be something cool we could put in SolidWorks. And so they added it in 2009. It's gone through several minor patches, but overall has remained the same since 2009, and it's a great tool. What is the Property Tab Builder? It's a standalone utility that can be used to create property interfaces inside of SolidWorks. Okay? So everybody's familiar with, you go to File Properties, right? And you have to manually enter everything. The Property Tab Builder interfaces with those properties and creates a form that you can input those properties into. Now that form can allow some automation and some drop-down boxes, some fields that you can use to make your life a little easier, make putting properties in a little bit easier, and it also allows you to create those, to force people to put those properties in using that Property Tab Builder. Because a lot of times people go into File Properties and they say, hey, I forgot about that property. I just wasn't thinking about it. If it's on the form, they know they need to fill it out, and it's right there for them. Why should you use Property Tab Builder? It's easy to use. It's very easy to use, very easy to integrate. It results in overall time savings, the uniformity among multiple engineers. I've got 9 engineers, and if I left to their own devices, they'd all name properties different things. Then we'd all be in trouble. It ensures that all pertinent data is entered. If you put it on a form where everybody sees it and it prompts them to put it in, they're more likely to put it in. How do I get started? The Property Tab Builder is its own interface. It's got its own little window that you go into to build the Property Tab forms, and that can be accessed through Windows, the Windows button here. And in all programs, SolidWorks, and then whatever year you're running. And then underneath SolidWorks Tools, Property Tab Builder. The interface looks like this here. It's real simple, just like you're designing a form in Access. It's very easy to use. The Property Tab Builder starts off with group boxes, so you'll have multiple groups for different information. You create a group box, and that's what this thing here is, that first initial group box. And then you can drag these various data sets, these field types, into that group box. The left side of the pane consists of all of the available options that you can use for form data types that you can pull in and add to these group boxes. The right side is the actual Property Tab form that you're building. Okay? Maybe. Okay. Adding fields to the form is extremely easy. It's a drag and drop operation. So you drag things from the left-hand pane into the right-hand pane, and then you can configure them. Group boxes are containers for other fields. So that's where you're going to put any field that you want. It's got to go inside of a group box. Text boxes are simple text entry fields. The list boxes are drop-down menus that can be populated internally to the form. To this builder, you can define all of the values that are going to be in that list through this interface, or externally, you can link it to an Access database, to a table inside of an Access database, or to an Excel file or a text file. Numbers are simple whole number integers. Check boxes are on and off boxes. And radio buttons are multiple choice radio style selections. So it's pretty simple stuff. Group boxes are containers for other field types, like I said. They can contain any variety of the field types. They can be used to group various properties together on a form. And, more importantly, they can be used to control visibility of an entire group based on properties. Now we're going to get into this here in a little bit, but what you can do, and what I do, is I have on my property tabs a box that says purchased or manufactured. If the engineer selects purchased, it gives them a drop-down of several options that need to be filled out for that purchased part. If they select manufactured, it gives them another set of options that they have to fill out for that specific manufactured set of parts. Text boxes are, like I said, simple text entry boxes. You can type anything you want into the box, and this is how you set them up. The caption is what's going to show up on the form itself. Name is any name that you want it to be. Some people have a preference to naming them a certain way. It doesn't matter. Type, you select text, and then the value. Now this value can be used to populate different, all sorts of different things. You can use default values here. You can use some expressions if you wanted to. And then this little box here determines whether it's custom property specific or configuration property specific. So a lot of people use custom properties or configuration properties or both. This will allow you to define where you want that information to go on which of those two tabs. Now if you select configuration properties, when you use this form, it's going to add it to the current active configuration properties. List boxes. Simple drop-down of multiple options, allowing the user to select one of those options to populate the linked property field. These fields can be generated using a static list of data or by linking the field to a text file, Excel spreadsheet, or Access database. Again, it's easy to define. The caption is what's going to show up on the form. The property name that's going to be used. The type, and this is a drop-down box that's going to allow you to define whether you want it to be a text file, an Access database, or an internally populated set of data. Okay. The path comes down if you use an externally populated source like an Access database or an Excel file. It's going to ask you for a path, and once you define the path, it'll ask you for tables or sheets, and it'll allow you to define that here. And again, you can define whether it's custom or configuration based, and you can tell it to allow custom values. Yes, sir.
When setting for a particular configuration, you mentioned it's only for the current.
That's correct. It will only affect the currently active configuration.
Okay, so there's no way to force it onto the default configuration?
Not at this time. Not unless the default is the only configuration there. If it's the only configuration there, it's going to go to the default configuration. But if you have multiple configurations, it's going to go to the active current configuration. So. And then, yeah, like I said, allow custom values. If the value doesn't exist in the data set that it's looking at, it will allow them to add it if you check that. Number fields. Real simple. Whole number integer entry box allows you to set up default values, the property name, and of course, everything's the same. This is going to be what shows up on the box, your property name, and then whether you want it to be configuration or custom specific. Check boxes. Yes?
Check
then add it to the list of available values, or is it unique then just for that?
It depends. If the file that they're trying to write to is accessible to them in a right manner, they can actually get back to it and write to it. It's not just read only. It will add it to that list. Checkboxes are simple on-off selection boxes. When checked, the linked property is set to yes. When unchecked, the linked property is set to no. So again, it gives you the default values that you can set up here. It allows you to set up what you want the value to be if it's in the checked or unchecked box, and then configuration custom specific. Radio buttons, much the same way as check buttons. You can set them up so that they can select various radio buttons. The difference between a radio button and a checkbox, though, is that with checkboxes, you can select multiple options within that checkbox. Radio buttons, you can only select one. So, now this is where I was getting into talking about the visibility. This is what I use to select visibility. Because they can only select one, I can then toggle the visibility of a group box based on the value that they give me here. And advanced options. Both checkboxes and radio boxes allow for advanced settings that dictate the visibility of other fields. Usually I use this to set group box visibilities, but you can set it to just do an individual property. So, for example, if the radio button purchased versus manufactured is set up, when purchase is selected, vendor number, vendor name, and vendor part number properties become visible. Whereas when manufactured is clicked, these properties are hidden, and instead, manufacturing type, material, and finish are visible. Visibility can be dictated to an individual field or to an entire group box containing those fields. Setting the advanced variables. When creating the text fields, you can assign special internal SolidWorks variables to populate these. This is one of the coolest things about Property Tab Builder. This is what makes it so intuitive and so easy for you guys to use. If I set up a box and I put in that text box SW material, what do you think is going to happen? When I click on that box, when I send it out to my users and they click on that box, it's going to give you the material management box from SolidWorks. And it's going to ask them to select a material there for that part. And then it'll link that material back into the custom properties. So you've saved yourself 2 steps there. Now you know that they defined the material in the part, which often enough is hard enough. And secondly, it's now going to populate onto your drawings if you link that out to your drawings. There are a lot of other advanced variables that you can use. SW file name will give you the name of the file that you're currently using. SW mass will actually go and look at the mass that's currently calculated for that part. COG is center of gravity, density, surface area, rebuild time. We use this a lot, especially if you're using like an EPDM environment. You can actually go through and search for parts that have a really long rebuild time to try and figure out why they have a rebuild time and how to reduce that. It's especially helpful in an assembly. If I have a whole assembly, I can create a report with EPDM and say, hey, what's my rebuild time for all of my individual parts? I can go down that list and say, hey, here's my part that has a problem. I can address that. A more complete list can be downloaded after the presentation. I'll give you the location of the FTP site and our website that you can get to download that. There is a nearly endless list of variables that you can pull in from SolidWorks. Some of them are real easy to find in the help files. Some of them are just don't exist. So let's get started. We'll open up the Property Tab Builder and we'll go through actually setting one of these up. Okay, so this here is our Property Tab Builder interface. Make this a little bigger for you guys. Okay. So this here, like I said, is the group box setup area. This is where the actual form is going to be set up. And this over here is the control attributes box. The attributes box is whatever you have selected in the left pane here. It's going to allow you to control the properties or the attributes for this setup. Okay? And it's real easy to do. We can just drag text box over here, and we can define the text box as part number, and name is going to be part number, because we don't like spaces in the properties. Some people do, some people don't. And then you can set up what type it's going to be, text, date, or yes and no. If you select a date, it's going to use the automatic filters, so when you go in there, it's going to give you a mask to input a date. If you use text box, it's just going to be a simple text entry box. List. And if you try and drop it out, like I just did, if you try and drop it outside of that group box, it's going to give you that error. It says that it can only be placed inside of a group box. Properties cannot exist outside of a group box. And then you can define, this right here is the internal definition. So you can define the internal list if you want to do it all in here. I don't recommend this. Just a personal preference of mine. It's just as easy for you to go out to Excel, create a table, put it in an Excel table that you can then just as easily go back out to and change at any time, and then that will automatically push out to your users the next time they start SolidWorks. It will not populate automatically instantaneously if they have a session open already. This is part of the startup process. The startup process launches the OLE database and goes out and looks at all of the linking files and pulls that data in. So if you do update it, you get a user that doesn't have the option you just updated, tell them to restart SolidWorks real quick.
And what's the effect of the alternative then?
Do what?
What's the effect of using the list and then making a change to that?
Well, using the Excel an Excel table or an Access database allows you a lot simpler way to go in and edit it. You know, if you have to go in here to this property tab builder every time you want to add a material or add a property to this, you're not going to do it.
But in terms of then the other user community's visibility, it's still a matter of restart.
Yeah. For your users that are receiving it, they have to restart for it to refresh that list and pull in. Now, I've had some bugginess from this in 2012. I haven't tested it in 2013 yet, but there were some instances where it tried to go out and update and did in some cases, and then in others didn't. The important thing, however, is when you create an Access database or a table, you have to put it in a location that is visible to your users. Now, that should be real simple for everybody to understand, but I can't tell you how many times I've had someone say, hey, my users are getting in here and they can't get to it. And it's because it's on somebody's personal hard drive. So you have to put this, whatever file you create has to go out to a networked location so that they can get to it and have access to it.
Can you put it in the vault?
I have not tried putting it in the vault. I don't believe you can, but that's a good question. I will look into that after this. Give me your email before you leave, and I'll get the answer for you. So, any other questions so far?
When I set this up previously, I had SolidWorks open and running so that I can actually see the output I'm getting. There is a refresh capability for you to force SolidWorks to reread your property tab builder.
And it's real buggy how that works. It tries, but it's not always successful. And when you're using Excel, it generally is pretty stable in doing that. When you use Access databases, though, it gets into a lot more bugginess and doesn't want to do that.
That's a control.
Q, I believe. Control Q. Yeah, Control Q. No. But most of the time what I recommend is, like I said, just have your users restart SolidWorks. It doesn't take that long to restart SolidWorks, and that'll prevent any bugs from occurring. That'll prevent them from coming back and complaining that you didn't do it. Okay? Oh. Okay. Helps if you don't exit out of your interface here. So, in most cases, like I said, I always go to either an Excel file or to an Access database. For me, it's real easy to set up an Access database, but I'm a databasing guy. Some people are intimidated by that. What my personal preference is, I have one Access database out there that runs all of my tables for this. And so, I've got multiple group boxes. I've got group boxes for finishes. I've got group boxes. I've got drop downs for every one of my engineers so they can go in and easily select their name. All that's controlled within various tables of one Access database. That way that file's sitting out there, and the next guy that comes in to work on things and do what I do is going to have one central place to go find all that information and change it. If I've got 15 Excel tables out there, he's going to spend a lot more time looking for it. So, but like I said, some people are intimidated by Access databasing. Some people aren't. That's my preference, and that's what I'd recommend. So, once you set up a table inside of Access, all you have to do is come out here and select Access Database, and it'll go out and start, like I said, it'll start the OLE databasing component and interface with Access and pull that data in for you. Yes, sir?
Does it matter what version of Access you have?
I have not tried it with 97, but I've tried it with 2003 and up, and I've never run into an issue. I can't say that 97 works, though. So, anything else? Okay. So let's see if they have access on this computer. And they don't. That's okay, we'll create one in Excel. So like I said, it's real easy to create. Open up Excel. I'd show you Access, but they didn't actually load Access like I asked them to. So open up Excel, create a table. Everybody here is familiar with creating a table in Excel, right? Okay, fantastic. So we can put in all of our values. For instance, we'll make this one for engineers. So at my place, I've got 9 engineers. We'll just create 4 of them out here. We'll save this out. For right now, I'm going to put it on the desktop. Like I said, always make sure that you put this out in a network accessible location. Your users, if you're going to allow custom properties, your users are going to need to have write access to this file. If you're not going to use custom values, you can set the property so that it's read only. So it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And always make sure that you have a backup of all this. Because inevitably, if you have write access, one of your users will eventually screw things up, and you will sit there cringing, wishing that you had a backup. So we'll save this out to our desktop for now, and we'll exit out of this. Okay? We'll set it to look for an Excel file, and we'll define the path, and then we'll tell it the range, which is going to be, in our case, I know that it was A1 through A4. Now, you don't have to define the range, but it does help. If you have a lot of data in there, this is where you could use an Excel file to house multiple sets of data for a specific property tab interface. So if you wanted to have all your engineers, all your property fit, your material finishes and all that in one specific Excel file, you could do that. Not my preference, but it may be what's easiest for you, and that's what it's all about. Okay? And we'll go ahead and tell it to put it on the custom properties. And of course it said it can't open that file. How nice. Yep. Thank you very much. You do have to define the sheet name. And it still doesn't like that. How nice. Yeah, it should not matter. All right, my guess is that they have a .NET issue on this machine. I've done this at work 100 times and it's never given me this kind of problems. But that's how easy it is to define. If my email is at the end of this, if you run into any issues, just give me an email. I'm happy to try and walk you through anything that you're having issues with. But anyway, we can go in and define all of these property tab boxes. Now I've got, say that I have this this group box complete. I'm going to go ahead and drop in another group box. And then I'm going to create a series of properties here. And we'll just call them approved by. Usually I would, since we're having problems with lists, usually I would use a list to define that. And I can do that with, since we're having trouble with Excel, I'll go ahead and do an internal list. And it's, like I said, it's just as easy as typing in here. Okay. And then we'll drop a checkbox. And we'll drop a radio button up here. Okay, and then on the radio buttons, we'll call them purchased and manufactured, if I can learn to spell. Okay, and then this is where we set up the visibility controls. So now that I've set up my radio button here, I can assign various group boxes or properties to the visibility options here. Okay. So if I select in here and then go grab that group box, it's going to associate it to purchased, and anytime that the purchase button is displayed, it'll show that, it'll make that box visible. Okay? So now if I go in and I set up a whole nother group box and I just drop some tabs in here, and I come back up to my radio button, I can define group box 2. And then, now that I say I'm done with this, I've got it all created, it's all ready to go, all I have to do is save this out to a network location that I can give all of my engineers to go look at. Okay? Now defining where this gets looked at is all done through the SolidWorks interface, the main SolidWorks interface. So we'll save this out and we'll tell it that we're going to use it. Test template, and we'll save it to the desktop for now. I normally do not advocate saving to the desktop, but in this environment, we're going to go ahead and do it. Okay, so inside of SolidWorks, everybody is familiar with the menu interface, tools, options. Okay, everybody here is familiar with that? Fantastic. You guys are easy. Okay. We're going to go to File Locations, and then in this drop-down box, we're going to go find Property tab. Custom Property Files. And you'll see that by default, SolidWorks is going to go look in the SolidWorks 2013 Lang English directory. That's where they throw all the neat stuff that comes in the open, out-of-the-box packaging. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of that, which some poor sap that has this room later on will probably hate me for, but that's okay. And we're going to go to Desktop and tell it OK. Now that we've defined the desktop, it's going to go look for those files anytime it uses it. Now the other thing that I forgot to say I should have mentioned before we did this, I'll go back in here and show you, is that these property tab interfaces are specific to the type of part that you're dealing with. They're specific to parts, to assemblies, and drawings. Okay? So you create a file for each one of those. Now the part file isn't going to be used when you're in an assembly. If you pull up an assembly and you go to it and you don't have an assembly property tab file built, it's going to come up and say, hey, there's no one there. So you have to define one for parts and for assemblies. Okay? You know, I don't do that. I'm not sure. Let's take a look. We can look real quick. I'd heard some rumors that was going to come out, but I'm not sure that it came out in 2013 yet. And I haven't gone and looked yet. Come on. They may have made a liar out of me. Now there's only one. In 2012, there's actually two drop-downs, Assembly ASM PRTP and PRT PRPP. And there's now just one. So now, I can't confirm this, but it may work interoperably between the two. But we'll find out here. Because I'm going to define one for assemblies real quick. Okay. So now we're going to go in and we'll just create a real simple part to test this out on. And we'll just make an extruded rectangle here. Okay. Now if we go over here, the part property interface is all accessed on the right-hand side here. This is the biggest problem I've had, is getting my users to understand that this is where they need to go now. And of course, I walk away and the thing disappears. It's off the projector here for you guys. Is over here to the right. That little box there. If you click on that, it's going to expand the property tab that you just built and display it. Okay? And it's going to say choose a custom property template from the combo box below. And there's actually two. So they've actually changed this in 2013. This is news to me. I haven't actually tested this in 2013 yet. Now it looks like you can choose between the two, and they're not independent of each other. In 2012, and in all of the previous releases since they've released this, there were actually two types of files that dictated which was going to be used for each. Now they're allowing you to use it for any of them. So if you have multiples, you can define that here. Your users can select which one they want to use. Of course, you want to name them assembly or part so that they can easily differentiate and select the right one. Okay? So if I go down here and I select the one that I created for test template, it'll then bring up my box. Now when I fill this in, it's going to feed right back into that property, the property manager that's a part internal to SolidWorks itself. Okay. Now the thing that you have to remember is you must hit apply. If you don't hit apply, it's not going to put it in there. Okay, so I've hit apply, file, properties, custom properties, configuration properties. So because I told it to put it in configurations and all of the setup that I did, it's dropped it all into configuration properties. It's automatically set up the fields that I told it to. Remember, I named, even though it displays part and then the pound sign on the form, when it creates the property here, it says part number. Okay? And it'll put all of that information right down in here for you, and then it'll put in the values that I selected when I put it in. Unchecked versus checked being what I left for that particular checkbox. Okay? Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions? All right. So we'll go back out here to Property Tab Builder and play with it some more. All right. So we'll create our initial group box, and we'll just drop a couple of text boxes in here. And we'll call this part number. And part number. And we'll leave it like that. And we'll call this date. And we'll go in and we'll set it to be date. We'll actually be more specific here. And we'll give it a checkbox. And we'll call this reviewed. And a radio button. And then like you see here, when you drop in new boxes, you just hold and drop it wherever you'd like it. You can always come back in here, move them around, change them. It's not going to hurt anything. But again, it's going to take effect the next time they start SolidWorks. It's not going to just push out to people who have active sessions. Okay? And then we'll drop in another group box down here. And we'll say vendor name. And we'll drop in, you know what, we'll drop in a list box here. Drop in one more group box for manufactured parts. And then we'll come back up here and set our visibility for each. And we'll drop in a text box down here. And we'll call it material. And on this one, we'll set that SW material value. Okay? And then we'll save it out to our desktop. And we'll go take a look at it. And template 1. So now we have our entire property interface set up here. We can fill it out. But if I select manufactured, and then I come down here, I've got, like I said, it's got the visibility all set up, but it now has the material management box. I can come in here and click Edit Materials. Now it's always going to prompt you to save the Custom Property tab because you're actually exiting the Custom Property tab interface in SolidWorks and going into the Material Management interface. So SolidWorks recognizes that you're changing interfaces and it says, hey, you're not done over here, you need to save. So we'll tell it yes. and it'll open up the internally available material management box. Okay? Now the other thing you can do with this is, like I said, you can link to Access databases and to Excel tables. So, for instance, in my place of employment, we use an MRP system that has an SQL database. Okay? Now SolidWorks won't allow you to gain access to that SQL database. It doesn't have the drivers necessary to interface with that, but Access does. So if you go in and you set up linked tables, you can actually import data from your MRP system into a drop-down box here. Now it gets kind of messy because, of course, the SQL database drivers are kind of finicky at times. But if you're not dealing with a terribly large set of data, if you don't have thousands and thousands of records in there to deal with, it can work. Okay? Does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
I'm using EPDM,
Okay.
and it strikes me that a lot of the things we're doing here are things that I'm doing nowadays.
Yeah, if you're using EPDM has its own built-in interface that you can use, and this is probably not going to be as valuable as if you're not.
Is using both of them in conjunction, is there a conflict possible?
No conflict. The EPDM can be linked to the custom properties themselves to fill out your data card through that. So there's not going to be a conflict, but you're certainly going to have some redundancy there. Okay? I mean, it's, for those of you that use EPDM, you have data cards that you can fill out, and those data cards kind of do this already. Whereas if you're not using EPDM, or if you're using Workgroup PDM, then this interface here is very valuable because, of course, you don't have data cards anymore. Okay? Yes?
You select the material field of showing property here. Does that tie automatically with property or material?
Yeah. Anything you do inside of this, once you select this material box and it brings up this interface, you are affecting the part that you're in. You're inside of the SolidWorks interface. Do what?
You don't have to go over here and check it.
That's correct. Yeah, this will allow you to set the material for that part right here internally. So, you've gone from the Property tab interface to the Material Management interface of SolidWorks. So at that point, you're affecting the part. It's not just some cosmetic change that you're making. You're actually going to affect the material of that part. So, and the biggest advantage for us was at least that 99 times out of 100, my guys are in prototyping mode and they're rushing a million miles an hour, and they forget to set the material properties. And then later on, I've got a CEO that comes and says, hey, you know what, we're going to ship this, but we haven't built it yet. How much does it weigh? And we go to run a mass analysis, and of course it says it weighs, I've got a 10,000 part machine that weighs 5 pounds in SolidWorks, which is always wonderful. So, yes?
So that brings me to the next question to me is required fields.
Unfortunately, SolidWorks by itself does not have required fields. Now with EPDM, you can set up some required fields. But with this interface, there's nothing that's going to force them to do it. So you have to kind of rely on them. It's a training issue. If you train them to do what they need to do here, and you make it easy for them, that's the ultimate goal. That's why they came out with this, and that's ultimately why the macros were originally created. People thought, hey, if I force people to go to file properties, it's not as easy as doing this. They're probably not going to do it. Whereas if you make it easy, you put a button right there in front of them that they can go click. It's going to tell them what all they need to fill out. They don't have to create the properties every time. They're probably going to do it. Now, I'm not saying they're going to do it 100% of the time. Trust me, I still fight it today. It annoys you. It will drive you crazy, but it's okay. If you make it easy, they will use it. Okay? Who else had a question? Yes?
Then generate reporting from that about all your properties.
I'm not sure that there are any internal property fields from simulation. I've never dealt with them. There might be. If you leave your email afterwards, I'll talk to some people and find out. But any of the SW properties, internal properties that you put in brackets, if you can access that, the Property tab builder can interface with it and pull that data in. I've just never ran into any that are specific to simulation. So, now you can do, like I said, you can do mass, density, that type of thing real easy. Those are all very accessible. One of the biggest problems I've had with SolidWorks, and I've been going back and forth with the documentation people there, is there needs to be a complete list of those SolidWorks internal properties that you can access, because right now they're everywhere. Only about 10 of them are actually in the help files. And so over the years, you just kind of stumble upon them and you end up with a compiled list like I have that, you know, probably doesn't include half of what's actually accessible out there. Okay? Anybody else have a question? No?
Some way to do a list, if you want to run a list, so like making a model of the vehicle, use like a make, and that drive the
Nested controls? No, they haven't expanded its capability to nested controls yet, but I have put in requests for that, but I don't, as far as the R&D team goes, I'm not sure where they're at on that.
Is there a way to do it maybe how you did with the
Yeah, if you had enough checkboxes, you could do that, but then it creates a static list that you have to go in and manage every time you add a new make or model. Now, if you don't have a lot of makes or models, it would be very easy to manage through that, or if your makes and models don't change that often, it might be acceptable to do that. Yeah, you could have various columns in your table or tables inside of your database that correspond to the various makes, and you could set the visibility throughout that using that. But I mean, like I said, if your makes and models go beyond just a couple, it's really going to create some work for you that's probably not going to work. So, anybody else? Okay. Okay, so we've now created all of these. We'll go back into the Property tab interface. Now we've already got one created. By default, the Property tab builder is going to come into a brand new field, a brand new form that you're setting up. So if you want to edit one that you already have, you can edit it while everybody's in. It's not going to make any difference. It's, you know, SolidWorks leaves it as a read-only setup for most people. So when you come into here is the only time you're really going to have write access to this form. So you can open the form and select one and open it. And then it'll bring up that form. But again, when you go to save it, everybody's going to have to exit out. Most of the time we'll have to exit out and go back in before it does. So, okay. So we'll create a new group box down here, and we'll add some fields. And a list box. So yeah, in here you could select the various, like you were asking, you could select the various setup visibility for various makes and models, but you're only going to have 2 checkboxes to deal with in each one. So I mean, you would have to create several layers of checkboxes to do that, and it may really not work out for you in that way. So, does that make sense? Yes.
Can you have a user filter through, let's say, like predefined, maybe a finish or something like that? You had like an anodized part that had red, black, yellow, the black was offered in 2 thicknesses.
Well, in that case, there's no filter for that, but what we do is we create multiple entries in the Excel file or the Access database that say anodized black 0.2 or anodized black 0.4, and then they'd have to select them. The only type of filter that you have is when they are in the list box itself, when they go to start typing in, it'll look through that field for that, for whatever you typed in, but there's no sort of search feature or filter that's going to allow you to narrow that down. So this is still a very limited interface. I mean, it's not designed to be some massive, can do everything interface. It's very simple, and the idea behind that is the SolidWorks simple. You know, if you make it simple for your users, they're probably going to use it. If you make it some complex mess that they have to click 500 times to get through, they're not going to use it. And you'll end up with a whole bunch of files out there with no properties. So, okay? Okay. Does anybody have anything that they want me to show them specifically that you have any ideas that you're thinking about? Do what?
Rebuild time?
Yeah, rebuild time. So we'll go back over here to the presentation and I'll pull up that list again. And we'll just create a text box and we'll set the value to SW rebuild time. And we'll save that out. And then we'll go back into, of course I exited SolidWorks. We'll go back in here and create a part. And we'll save the part. That's not cool. We'll create a second part here and try an assembly. I apologize. This worked in 2012, I swear. What's annoying is I'm going to have to go home and update it at my own. And we'll make an assembly. All right. Now it's asking me to create one, but it's only giving me an option for one. Which is correct. All right, I will double check that when I get home. If you send me an email, my email's at the end of the presentation, and double check why. I'm not sure why 2013 isn't allowing me to create a property tab for assemblies. In 2012, like I said, there are two options when you go to save it. It's either going to be saved as a PRT or an ASM PR file. And that is what dictates when you come into the various file types, whether it's assembly or part, which one it pulls from. This interface, for whatever reason, is only allowing me to save it as a .prt PR. So I'm not sure exactly what's going on. And that may be a bug in 2013. It may just be a bug on this system, but we'll certainly check it out. And if it's a bug, we'll turn it in. Yes? You can define the appearance through materials, but you can't really define there's no other interface to define the color through that. At least not that I'm aware of. There may be a internal SolidWorks property that will allow you access to the appearance manager, but we don't deal with enough appearances for me to have dug into that. But yeah, I mean, I use them from time to time. I've just never used it enough to include it in the property files. So, but that's a good question. We'll send out some questions and find out if there's an internal property to that. So, yeah. I'm just not sure if there's a property that can be accessed through the Property tab Builder to bring up that display state manager. Like if we put in SW materials, it'll bring up the material manager. I'm not sure that there's a display state manager property that will do the same thing. But that's a very good question. I'll definitely check on it and let you know. So, are there any other questions? Yep.
You use enterprise already from?
Yeah.
So we use enterprise data cards, how do you then use these property files?
Well, the enterprise data cards are tied back to the part properties. So you can use this to define them, and then that'll automatically come into your enterprise data card. So, but like I said, the value of this greatly diminishes if you're using enterprise, because enterprise's data cards already provide that same type of interface for people to get to. So, well, not in my enterprise environment, I don't. In enterprise, we use enterprise data cards solely because that's easy. But I also manage a small work group that uses workgroup PDM, and that workgroup PDM interface doesn't have anything. There's no data cards in workgroup, so when you don't have that, this Property tab Builder interface is the way to go. So, yep. No, there's no validation other than the question was, can you validate data that you put into here? And the answer is that you can validate it in the way that if it's in your list box, if it's in the defined values, it's only going to allow you to select one of those predefined values, but there's no way to validate data beyond that. There's no way to say, hey, that this is 8 characters long or anything like that.
Let's say, extend a micro to do the job,
To a what?
to connect the property manager to, let's say, a macro external application to do the job of validating.
Yeah, you could absolutely connect it to a macro and do this same interface through a macro arrangement. And that's actually, like I said at the beginning of this, that's actually where Property tab Builder came from, funny enough. A guy named Larono actually built one of the first Property tab interfaces using a macro and various forms through that macro. So, but as far as internal to this tool, there's no way to validate it. But yeah, if you wanted to do some custom API programming with macros, you could certainly do that. So, anybody else? I'm here to answer your questions. I may not know the answers, but I can get the answers. Yep.
Can you get the information that's in the property tab and export that to a database? That's when you bring stuff into a database?
Not internal to this. We do some of that, but it's through macros. And if you had Enterprise PDM, you could do some report exporting that would allow you to do that. But simply with this tool, no, there's not going to be a way for it to talk back to that to anything to put that data in there. This pulls data in. It's not designed to push data out. But there are plenty of macros out there on the forums that you could use to export it out to an Access database or to a table or something like that if you needed to. So now the other thing you can do is you can take these properties and you can link them into a bill of material table. So you could have a bill of material table set up that has various properties listed out on that table. Then you could save that table out to an Excel file if you needed to, which is actually what we do. We look at this at the top level assembly, export it as part of a bill of material table that has all the properties I need in it, and then save that to an Excel file that I can manipulate and try and look at what's going on in the model. So it's very beneficial for looking at, if we go into an R&D environment. My company builds food handling packaging products. So if you go to Walmart and you buy Tyson chicken inside the little plastic trays, or you go to Walmart and you buy the little beef cubes, quarter pound and pound cubes that are in plastic trays with film on top. That's what we do. When we build our huge machines at the top level, when we're prototyping, the first question that my manufacturing director asks is, okay, out of all the parts, out of all these 7,800 parts you got, how much time is it going to take up on my mill or my lathe? And of course, I'm magic, so I can just pull that out of thin air and tell him that. And so what I use is I use this. If my engineers defined all of the parts as whether they were going to be manufactured or purchased, I can then go through and say, how many parts do I have that are going to be manufactured? What manufacturing type are they going to go through? And then I can roughly say, out of 7,800 parts, I got 324 that are going to be on the mill. And then we can use that to plan our prototyping process. He can go back to the board of directors and say, you know what, I got 300 parts that have to be set up on the mill, and knowing the average time a part takes on my mill with setup and everything, it's going to take 6 months to build this. So, any other questions? Anything you want to see? This is a pretty simple interface, and they gave me quite a bit more time than we need. So if you have any questions, anything you want to see, I'm happy to go through it. Yep.
Is there a difference between using a text file and Excel file?
No, not really. It's just your personal preference. As far as the system is concerned, there's no difference between the two. It's just going to pull up it uses the Windows OLE database. So it's looking for an object and then connecting to that object interface and pulling data in. So, there's no real benefit or difference between the two other than your own personal preferences, what makes it easier for you to manage. So for me, that's an Access database. For you, it may be a text file.
What format is your text file?
It's going to be in just a .txt. Just a simple list. It's just a hard return after each entry, and it's going to look for each hard return is going to be the break. So you can put spaces in. It's going to recognize that spaces are still in the same field. It's looking for that hard return before it goes to the next entry.
So there's a long list that you compiled?
Yes, I'll give you the. It'll be available with this presentation. Which will be available right there on www.kcswug.com. It'll be available later tonight. And I'll put up the presentation, and I'll also put up a file, an Excel file, that lists all of the properties that I know of. Now, I'm not saying that that's all of them, because SolidWorks makes various properties available through the API that never get put into the help files, and one of us out there just happens to stumble upon them. So, any other questions?
Training way to clear out previously entered properties.
Just wipe them out? There are certainly some macro applications that you can use to do that. There's nothing internal to SolidWorks that I know of that will do that, but I have actually had some experience using a pretty simple macro to do that.
Reuse parts built out there that have had issues that it's legacy, and then when we go and use my project to have builder, it adds a lot to either the custom or migrate some of the stuff into configuration.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of creates a mess. Drawings were pulled in this data to populate the title block. It doesn't always pull the right field, and pull one, and new one.
Yeah. Yeah. SolidWorks is always going to has in the past, I can't say it's always going to, has always in the past grabbed the configuration specific property first, and then the custom property. Okay? So if you have custom properties that are named the same as what's in your configuration properties, it's always going to look at the configuration properties first. So that is something you need to pay attention to when you set this up, is if you have a whole bunch of parts out there that already have that set up, you need to be cognizant of which you're using and which you need to use. Now, there are some, like I said, there are some macros out there that can migrate properties from configuration properties to custom properties, or custom properties to configuration properties, vice versa, that are available out on the forum. I've written one. I know that Deepak Gupta has written one.
There's some utilities too, you can do mass property edits across your network storage.
Yeah, there are all sorts of various third-party tools that you could use to accomplish that, but yeah, definitely be cognizant of what specific property set you're working with, because if you end up with, you have a whole bunch, and this is what I ran into, was we had a whole bunch that when we very first started using SolidWorks in 2003, 2004, that were put into configuration-specific properties because everybody thought, yay, we're going to use configurations. And then about 3 years later, somebody said, we don't like configurations. We're never, ever going to use them again. And so then we went to custom properties. And so now we have files over here that have them in one place and files over here that have them in another, and a custom property tab builder that doesn't know the difference. So what we did is we wrote a macro that actually went through and migrated all of them from the configuration-specific data set to the custom property data set. That way that they're all the same across the board. And if you're interested in doing that, you can let me know. I can certainly give you that macro. There are no guarantees that it's going to work for you. You do have to go through and edit it to work for what you need, but I'm certainly happy to share that. So, anything else?
How many tables do you have in your database?
In mine, I have 11. So, we do everything from material finishes, manufacturing types, engineers, reviewers, buyers, vendors. We pull all of that in. We actually use, like I said before, we actually use access to go out and look at our SQL database and pull in some of our vendor information that way, which makes it a little bit easier. But again, like I said, you end up, in that case, you end up with, like, for instance, my vendor table has, 6,000 vendors in it. You end up with such a large data set that it's hard without a filter or some internal mechanism to go through there to ask an engineer to go scroll down through 6,000. And if they don't know, there's been so many people over the years that have named different vendors this and that, and, trying to find them can be a challenge that way. So, we didn't. We went to a text entry box in that case because it just, we tried doing using the vendor table, and it just, unfortunately, because we don't know the nomenclature that someone used to set that vendor up, the Festo group might be under Festo, it might be under the Festo, or it might be under Kansas City Festo, or God forbid it may be under Kevin Ost, who is our sales guy. Yeah. Well, and at least if they name them Festo and then something else, it's easy to get through because they're all in Fs. But more often than not, you got some yahoo that put the in front of it, and so you're looking for Festo and it's actually down in the T's. So in that case, where it got to be, the mantra is keep it simple. So if it's taking more than a few seconds for someone to try and find data, they're not doing it right. You need to make it easier for them. Because ultimately that's the whole point behind this tool, is let's make it easier for the engineer to gain access to that data and fill it in properly. So, and this, really the biggest benefit to this interface itself is not with my existing engineers. They've been around long enough. All of my guys have been there for 4 or 5 years now, so they all know what needs to go in there. I trust that they're mature individuals and they can figure out how to put it in there. I'm not saying that they are. I'm saying that I trust they are. Okay? But when we bring a new person in, we bring summer interns every year. Having this box there really helps. Because then that summer intern goes, hey, this is exactly what I need to put in there. And we don't end up with a whole bunch of different people's nomenclature being used in our property files. Anything else? We got all the time in the world. Well, okay, at least until the next session. Okay. Like I said, my email is up here. I apologize for the shortness of this. Unfortunately, this is a pretty simple interface, and they gave me a little bit more time than we needed. But my email is up here. If you run into any problems, feel free to contact me. Like I said, I'm a user group leader. The forums are out there. That's what we're here for. That's why we do what we do. We're happy to answer questions. If I don't know, I know who to contact and who to ask. And trust me, if I pester them enough, they'll give me an answer. So, thank you very much, guys. Enjoy the rest of SolidWorks World.